Yeah, I sent everybody in my life group this morning a copy of the emailed Red Bank reminder where your first words were, "Don't forget to set your clocks right."
Mm-hmm.
So that maybe they'll show up for our 10:30 thing instead of 10:30, at 10:30 the new time.
Yeah, maybe. Most people, I know we don't even have an alarm clock anymore. We just use our phones, and phones do that automatically. So I think that's a lot of the phones that are out there nowadays do change automatically.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of phones and clocks even.
Yeah. I was hoping that mine would change, since that's what I set last night was actually my iPad rather than my phone. But fortunately, I woke up early on my own, and it did work. So I was thankful. But back in the old days when I wasn't as trustworthy, I had a wind up alarm clock or a battery operated alarm clock I would set. Looks like you and me, and Mark so far. Good morning, Mark.
It's like he's in the car somewhere.
Maybe so.
I think they're in Jackson.
They might be.
What I will do once he gets started, I will mute all of us on the Zoom.
Okay.
And that way we'll just be picking up his voice. I think, I hope, I pray.
Oh, so is Mark teaching this morning?
No, Lee Harris is teaching this morning.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Let's see. I need to adjust this just a little bit.
Yeah, I like Lee as a teacher. He does a good job.
Excellent. He's an excellent teacher.
Uh-huh. I'll have to get off probably before y'all are done, just to finish my own prep for today. I'm going to see how many of our folks are in our life group have got both of their shots and are about ready to get back to the building, and see, because I'm looking forward to getting back to the building myself.
Yeah. Have you guys finished both your shots?
We got those about a week or two ago now. I lost track. We got them on the 4th, March 4th.
So you're in the window at least where you're getting close to being.
Mm-hmm.
What do they say? 2 weeks after the second shot?
Minimum of 2 weeks. I've always been a little more comfortable with 4 weeks for any kind of an injection like that, a vaccination like that. So I would say it would certainly be April before we'd get back. But so I'll probably at least do an Easter service with our life group before we get back there with you guys. Do you remember how many people we had in the building last Sunday morning for worship?
Well, it depends. We checked it in according to that attendance report that you got. I think you got one. I don't know if you did or not. But anyway, according to the attendance report we got, there were 172, 173, something like that here.
Wow.
Okay. I always get up and right when Tommy gets up to preach, I'll go up to the balcony and just do a head count.
Uh-huh.
And I must have counted wrong, because I only counted 138, 139, something like that.
Okay.
So I know we had some people that were here for Sunday school that didn't stay for worship. So that could account for some of that, but I don't think there were 25. So I don't know. I may have miscounted somehow.
Okay.
So,
well, that's still a pretty good crowd.
Yeah, that's roughly half our congregation that was present at some level.
Has Jamie been tracking how many that we're getting on our live stream and Facebook and YouTube and all of that together?
Yeah, that's out there. That's available through our YouTube site. Yeah, I don't know how often. I always forget to look at those.
Yeah. Well, Kerry Newhoff, whatever his name is, says that, after things settle down and people start coming back to the building, we're going to have to maintain both methods.
Oh, yeah.
And that'll be good. We'll have people that I think will reach that we wouldn't reach otherwise.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And, we've been working toward, Zach and Melissa Bob are on the list today. That's good.
Oh, okay.
We've been working toward having live streaming available for, at least a couple of years before all this happened.
Right. Yeah, we just kind of, a couple of the people that we had lined up to help us with that kind of fell through.
Right.
And then it kind of fell by the wayside until it became a higher priority.
Well, our hand was forced, basically.
Uh-huh. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
So what is your official starting time? 9:30?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And we should be through around 10 after 10 at the latest.
Okay.
Something like that, right? Yeah, that's about 40 minutes. It could be 35, 30, 35, whatever. Somewhere.
Yeah. We use our own personal Zoom, so we only have 40 minutes. So I have to set a timer on my phone so that we don't end up with a situation that's happened a couple of times to Webb and John Farrar and Dave and Bob Trammell, where they get into the closing prayer, and all we get is, Lord, thank you so much. Click. So I have to know.
Thankfully, the Lord's Zoom are not every 40 minutes.
I'm thankful for that. It's just kind of disruptive to his humans that are in our group. Yeah. So I have to remember to shut up in time to give them time. Feedback sounds a little bit better.
Very well.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody on this.
Good to see you again in person.
Good to see you too. It's been a long time.
Yes,
Something like a year maybe.
It has been quite a year.
You're family well.
Yeah, we've stayed well, and thankful that Mom got her second COVID vaccination, I guess, last week, right before her birthday. And so last weekend we were able to celebrate her 91st birthday. We were really, really thankful for that.
Things are moving along, and it's looking hopeful.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody at work the other day, and said, "You got vaccine yet?" And I said, "Not yet." I said, this is one time where I wished I was just a little bit older, but that's probably not a good thing to do.
You're not old enough, you are.
I'm too young.
Well, I said, the younger ones really, because the ones that are out in the country.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve, don't forget to mute your microphone.
Okay, yeah, let me go back and do that right now. If I can find it, it's moved. There.
Thank you. Hey, do you want to do a mic check up there, Lee? Go up there, because this is going to be the mic that picks you up, I think.
Okay.
This, we'll make sure. Test 1, 2, 3. Test. Let's see. Jane, I'm texting Jane.
Okay. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mic check. Good morning.
Good morning, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you, Ms. Sheila.
Do we have a sign seat now?
I don't know, no more so than ever.
Sit this way so I can see the screen good. Good morning. Good morning, how are you? I'm doing good.
Charles. All right. Good. Hey, Steve.
Hey, how's it going?
Good morning. Morning.
How are you doing? In person Yes, this is my better Zane.
Yeah. Working a lot. Trying to sit out front in nice weather.
He's still working from home. He thinks this will be like a permanent.
Oh. Yeah, I like it when this is all over. I don't think we'll be back to normal ever.
Yeah, our new normal.
Yeah, it's okay. My dogs like it.
Yes.
They're really excited.
He doesn't know what to do the days that Charles does work from home, because she's like, do I stay in mama's office, go visit daddy's office, and wears her out, she goes back and forth.
How y'all
Hey, good morning.
Seems like almost 2 years.
I know, it's been quite a while. That's been good. Did you ever make a trip out to Texas?
First of April.
First of April. Yeah, I saw a meme that went out that said, people are saying, this has been the worst year ever. Dogs are saying, this has been the best year ever.
Yes.
How's your sickness?
I think it's good. I'm touching base with
Jamie right now, see what she's seeing. Hey, can you hear him at all? Can you hear him when he's talking? Okay, you could hear him. If that looks okay? Yeah. That's what I did. Is it not showing up? Say something. You should be able to hear. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Good job. Okay. Is he bigger now? That's cool. No, same size. Maybe as tall as you can. Yeah. That's what I'm doing. See, I'm doing it now. On my screen, it's looking bigger.
Okay, let me log into a different computer and see.
Steve, when I was watching the clips on there, I was seeing ones that were like from a minute.
There's a little bit of delay.
Yeah. But I was confused. I was going, I'm not waiting.
Can I hear you in person? Can I hear what's going on too?
Sorry. I have we still have about 4 minutes before the official structure. You can't find it.
Well, this tomorrow will be Thursday.
Well. Official records. I'm feeling a lot of stuff. I'll see you back here. I can see y'all. I hear you. Whatever you want to take it away, Lee. Okay. Do we know it? Everything's live. Everything's live. Okay, that's enough pressure. Well, good morning. It's great to see everyone in person. I went ahead and took my mask down early so my glasses would have a chance to get the fog off before we got started. We are continuing the study that Steve began last week for us in the first letter of John. So we're in the first epistle of John. Last week covered chapter 1, and this week we are going to be doing the first few verses of chapter 2. And the theme, as you can see from the slide here, is the idea of daily discipleship. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So specifically in this particular section that we're going to be looking at, one of the central ideas is that Jesus is our advocate. So we're going to be talking about that. So let's see, Steve, we can hit the next slide. Some of the themes that have emerged so far in 1 John are really very simple ones. These are not big words. One of the things that I remember hearing a few days ago, Steve, is that when students start to study Greek, one of the first places they'll go to in the Bible is either the Epistle of John or the Gospel of John, because the words he uses are so simple that they're fairly easy to translate. They're not complex ideas.
Yeah, it's all Greek to me. So.
It's all Greek to you, and you're still way ahead of me. But if we take a look at that list of words, those are fairly simple words, even words that maybe when we're first learning to read, we learn about, although maybe not sin. That's usually not one of the ones that we start with in first grade. But even though they're very simple words, there are some really profound truths in the way that John uses them. Okay, so if we go a little bit further we will we'll read. I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. And some of you have different versions, but you can certainly follow along on the slides that are taken from the New International Version. My little children, these things I write to you so that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the whole world. Now by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He who says, I know him, and does not keep his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself to walk just as he walked. All right, so, John is continuing some of the ideas that were presented in the first chapter, in the first part of his letter.
And if you were, following on the screen, then obviously you noted the differences in the translations between the New King James and the New International. But there's one word in particular that is probably not in most of our translations. I think it's only found in the King James and the New King James. And can we have the next slide, Steve? And that's the word propitiation. Is that a word that you typically use in everyday speech, propitiation? When I hear that, my first thought, honestly, is Major League Baseball, because, it's baseball season and the idea of pitching something. But then I think, well, it also sounds like something maybe one of our engineer friends that works at CPA might talk about, kind of test they might do. So I'm a little worried about some propitiation going on with that turbine down there. We probably need to check that out. But the idea is really different. And what's that particular verse? That would be verse 2 of chapter 2. What is the word that you have instead of propitiation? Atonement. Okay.
Yeah, the NIV said atoning sacrifice.
Atoning sacrifice. The whole idea of this is, who pays, and this word propitiation, depending on the translation you have, is found in one other place in the New Testament, and that is Romans 3:25. Paul says that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There's no difference there. And furthermore, he says that Jesus, we are justified freely by God's grace, not by the things that we've done. And the New King James says, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness. Because in his forbearance, God had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So the thing that we often forget because of our perspective on things is what sin really is and what it really represents. As other people have said, we're not sinners because we sin. We sin because we're sinners. That's who we are. And without God's grace, none of us will ever see him. None of us ever be with him. So God did for us what we could never do for ourselves in sending Jesus. And then the reference that's in Leviticus in chapter 16, there is, and it's still celebrated, the Jewish Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is still observed by observant Jews all around the world. This is the one day where the high priest would go into the most holy place and sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice. And he would sprinkle it on the cover, the lid of the ark, just as it says there. Would somebody read that for us, please?
He shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering of the people and take its blood behind the curtain and do with it as it is. He shall sprinkle it on the atonement cover and in front of it. In this way, he will make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins be. He is to do the same for the tent of the meeting, which is among them in the midst of it.
Thank you. It helps me because then I don't have to keep turning it. I keep forgetting to turn to the other side too. So once a year, the high priest could go in and do that, but that was the only time he could do it. What was the sacrifice that Jesus offered?
Himself.
He offered himself. And once he did that, that took care of it. It didn't have to be once a year continuous sacrifice. That was
he made the ultimate sacrifice of himself. And so that once and for all took care of sin for everyone who would believe, who would claim that. It didn't have to be an ongoing thing. It was one time and done forever. And of course, he was able to do that because he was the perfect sacrifice. You know, sometimes we might think it's strange that, you know, back in the Old Testament, especially, you know, we read in Exodus and those other books about how they would slaughter animals. And, you know, we don't quite see the significance of that. But if we think of it in terms of an innocent victim paying for the sins of someone else, that was the representation there. And then that again is what Jesus did for us, completely sinless. But he was able to save, as the book of Hebrews says, to the uttermost. So what's the next slide?
The Romans passage.
Oh, there's the Romans passage. And there we have the word propitiation or atoning sacrifice. So again, this is a word that, you know, once we kind of understand the significance of it, will help us to make a little more sense of it. So then that kind of takes us to the next section. Is if we think about some of these significant words that are in there that keep showing up. So, you know, we talk about simple words. You talk to the average person, do they use the word sin very often? I mean, what do most, you know, if people hear the word sin, you know, people who aren't believers, what comes to their mind?
Probably some really heinous crime, maybe murder or kidnapping or something really awful that we think of in terms of dark.
It's really bad, but do they use the word sin on the news? Do they say, you know,
They haven't said that about women.
they haven't said that about a lot of things. Now, but the thing is, if someone offends us, we feel like they've sinned against us. You know, we feel that way. We may not say, you know, sin, because that's, again, that's sort of a church word, you know, that we use, but other people will talk about wickedness or evil or all of that. So even though people may not use the word, they know what it means. They have a working definition of it. But because of what sin does to us, we don't really see it for what it really is. And it's, you know, really, once you're in Christ, you're able better to understand it and see it and realize how serious it really is. But, you know, that word in and of itself, that doesn't really affect it because they think it's sort of archaic. And they say, oh, well, you must be, you know, you must go to church or something like that because, you know, we in common usage, we don't use that. So see what's the next slide. Okay.
What's interesting is to think about what the word sin means. It's missing the mark.
Yes.
God has set the mark.
Yes. Charles was just saying that the word sin means to miss the mark. There's a standard. And I believe this even comes from archery, if I remember right. You know, if you miss the mark, you know, you either hit the bullseye or you don't. But if you miss it, that's what sin is.
Lady,
Yes.
I don't think even in the church we use that word a whole lot though. I think personally that, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, we think, oh, I made a mistake. Or I
Yes.
just felt like it was just some little something.
Right.
And I don't think even in our own lives, a lot of times we recognize and call sin what it really is.
That's a good point. Yes, thank you, Jill. That we do forget. We minimize what we do. We tend to, you know, maximize and magnify what other people do. Because why do we do that? Because we're sinners, and because that's our sin nature. That's what we do. And we're not going to be free of that until we're in heaven, until we're with God. Charles.
And I think that more often we are likely to pray to God and thank Him for forgiving us mercy.
Yeah, many times we will say thank you for forgiving our sins, but we also need to as it said in the previous chapter, if we do what, he is faithful and just to forgive us. We have to do what? We have to confess our sin. We have to agree with God that this is wrong, and that's hard to do.
That imagery of sin missing the mark, the opposite of that is righteousness, which means to shoot straight.
Mhm.
And so that word picture helps us, I think, to identify sin and our shortcomings, our failings, our sometimes going beyond the mark, missing to the right or the left, short or long. It's just an interesting picture to think in terms of a target and then failing to hit that target, and then versus shooting straight and hitting the target.
Right.
But it's not
Aiming
a
for the
perfect,
target.
yeah, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's pretty good. Yeah.
It is. It is a very good analogy. So can we go back to the advocate screen for just a minute there? I think that was it. Yeah, okay. Advocate. What is an advocate?
Someone who speaks for an idea or someone.
Okay, someone who speaks for another. So, literally advocate, to speak for. Obviously, we might think of the Gospel Advocate, the publication that we've had for many years. But if you think of somebody being in a position as being an advocate for someone, what is there someone or some position that maybe comes to mind?
A lawyer.
Maybe a lawyer, okay? For all the jokes that we make about lawyers, the fact is that they are qualified to go into court and speak for us. And a lot of times when we're in a position where we're in trouble, and I'm not asking for true confessions here, but when you're in a position where you have done something against the law, then you need someone who understands the law and can speak for you. There are people who try to be their own defense, and you're allowed to do that, but it doesn't always go well when people try to do that. But if we think about the fact that Jesus is our advocate before the Father, what gives him the right to speak for us?
One of the primary points of the chapter 1 that John was making was that Jesus came in the flesh, and so he understands at least our side of things in the flesh. So that's one of the primary points that he was really combating, because many people were saying, or were beginning to say, well, Jesus really didn't come in the flesh; he was just here in spirit form. So since he did come in the flesh, and John makes that very clear in the first couple of verses. With empirical evidence, he said, then we have that advocate, at least in part because of that.
Yeah. John says, we saw him, we heard him, we handled him, we touched him, we were with him, he was here. The Gospel of John makes that clear when Jesus reappears after his resurrection. So that's the thing that we need to remember, is that Jesus experienced what we experienced. He experienced everything we experienced. Temptation. He was tired. He was hungry. He was thirsty. He was treated unfairly by people. He was sinned against. He died. He experienced death. All of that he experienced for us. And so because of that, he has this special relationship. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus told his disciples, you're going to have somebody who's going to come and be a counselor, a comforter, who's going to be here with you. But then when he goes back into heaven, he goes to be our advocate. In Romans 8, it says, who's going to bring any charge against God's elect? Because Jesus is interceding for us at the right hand of God. It says the same thing in Hebrews. Charles.
And Jesus did it without sin.
The reason he's qualified is because he is sinless, and because he was able to take on all of those sins. If we think about just the sins that we commit in our lives, in just in my life. And then I multiply that times the people that I know, times all the people that are currently in the world who've ever walked this earth, who ever will walk this earth until Jesus returns. He was able to pay for all of that because he was man, and because he was God, he was infinite. And that was the only way that was ever going to happen. So if we go on to the next section there.
Because of the offerings, they were to select the best.
Right. You know, when they were offering sacrifices, it always had to be an unblemished animal, a perfect animal.
And Jesus was the perfect.
And he was perfect in every way. So the idea of knowing something. Do you know stuff?
I used to.
You used to know stuff? Yeah, I don't know that I remember all the things that I, but we know stuff, okay? So, Debbie, do you know who the president of the United States is?
Yes.
Do you know who the governor is?
Okay, yes.
But have you ever met them? No. And of course, you can meet somebody, and then there's that level of knowing somebody. But then there are also the people that are in your family. There are people in our church family. So there's different levels of knowledge, right? You can know about something, and in English, we just have the word know. In other languages, there's knowledge that's sort of cognitive knowledge, and then there's knowledge by experience, and they're different words. So when people say that they know God, and you hear somebody say that, what do you think they mean?
Hopefully that they stand in the scriptures.
Yeah. Okay, if they know God, then we would say, okay, well then let's talk about, we can talk about prayer, we can talk about reading the Bible and our relationship with Christ and those sorts of things. But
God is a shallow level of knowing God. There's greater concept.
yeah. I know all about this, because my parents took me to church when I was young, or I've heard of it. But to really know Jesus, to really know God, what does John say is the evidence of that? So like when if you have children and you tell them, what you want them to do, and they know what you said, then you look for the follow-through, right? Are they really doing it? Are they really walking that way? If somebody says, I know how to do this, then, you say, okay, well, let's see some evidence. You say you know how to play, baseball. Let's get up a team and let's play. I have students that will come to me at UTC and they're thinking about changing their major and they're interested in music. I said, okay, good. Well, tell me about your background in music. So they, tell me some of the things they've done before. And then I'll start talking to them about, okay, well then if you're going to be a music major, you're going to have to do an audition. And they say, what is that? I said, well, you're going to have to sing or play before the faculty so we can see how you do. And the funny thing is, a lot of times I never see those students because they know about music, they know music. But if you're going to be a music major, you have to do music. We don't just talk about it, we do it. And so you know, and not everybody is like that. I mean, there are a lot of students who say, sure, this is really what I want to do. But that's how we know if somebody is really committed to something. If you're committed to anything, it should be in the way you live your life, in the way you speak, in the way you talk. And a lot of times, you know, you think about this when you're interviewing somebody to be a contractor to work on your house. You want to talk to that person and you want to get to know them, but you also want to know, you know, what do they know? What can they assess about your particular situation? And then you might want to go see what other kind of jobs they've done in the past, right? Talk to people. So there's that level of knowledge. Okay.
I was just thinking, we know God by listening to him and by talking to him ourselves. That's how we come to know someone else. And that's what has to happen with us, between us and God.
That level of knowledge, of really knowing God, is something that we always continually to grow in. And that vulnerability where we express to God, this is how I feel, or we confess our sins, or this is what I'm struggling with. And we tell him, he understands and he cares about us. And he wants to have that closer relationship with us. That is more than just, you know, knowing certain Bible passages and facts from the Bible. What about truth? What does truth mean today?
The big thing now is everyone has their own truth. Like, you speak your truth.
Your truth.
Yeah.
Okay. But and that sounds good because people say, well, you know, oh, okay, well, that's your truth. But if you are going to go to the doctor and the doctor, you know, gives you a diagnosis, do you want to know if that diagnosis is true? I mean, I would. I don't want the doctor saying, well, you know, the way I see it, you know, well, you know, do you see that based on something that you found in your examination or something? No, I just kind of have this feeling about it. You know, we don't want that kind of doctor. So when you get right down to it, you know, people may say, "Oh, your truth, my truth," you know, whatever. But we don't really want to live our lives that way. So if the truth is in a person who says they know God, how do we know?
Other action again, back in John 14, he says he is the truth. So we can follow the actions that we observed or read about in Jesus said that's the definition. Well, that's not a practical even yet.
Right. So if you're having trouble hearing what Kevin was saying in John 14, Jesus said, you know, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And truth is by actions. And of course, you know, he was talking to his disciples who would live with him. And so when he said, you know, truth, when he spoke truth, but they had seen the way he lived, that was the evidence for them. So truth has to be demonstrated somehow. It needs to go back to evidence.
Lee,
yes.
It's interesting that John says of God, God says, if you know me, or if you love me, you will do what I say.
Mm-hmm. With children, you know, and parents with children, isn't a lot of times it may be effective to really appeal to love, to the relationship that you have with your children? Maybe that works better with the grandchildren than the children, I don't know. But many times you can appeal to, you know, facts or logic or say, you know, or because I said so, But when you can appeal to the relationship that you have with your child, and I think about how many times that I thought about doing something that was wrong, but then I thought, okay, but do I want to hurt this person that I love? Do I want to hurt my parents? Do I want to do something that is going to cause embarrassment to my family? That was something I remember my grandmother appealing to when I was very young. Is just talking about the way that you live your life. She said, don't live in such a way that's it's going to bring shame to your family. There are extreme forms of that, certainly, but the idea of care about those close to you. So if a relationship means something to you, then obedience and the way you walk will come out of that. Then we have love. How is love used in our world these days? Or misused?
Lots of different ways.
I would say, I love chocolate pie.
Yeah. We love certain things. And then again, this is one where we have one word, and they have 4 words in Greek. Is that right, Steve? For different kinds of love. So it's usually on when we talk about somebody or talking about something. We say we love something. Presumably you don't love your spouse in the same way you love chocolate pie or the Atlanta Braves or any, nothing against Atlanta, but we recognize that that's a very different sort of thing.
And so what we're doing is substituting the word love for life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or preference.
Yeah.
Which are, those preferences change sometimes from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
I love pizza, but if I eat pizza and I get sick, then maybe I don't love pizza tomorrow as much as I did today.
Right. I might not feel the same way about pizza. God so loved the world
And gave.
that he gave. It wasn't because he liked us, because it wasn't because of anything that was in us. Jesus loved us enough to lay down his own life for us.
And that suggests that when you love someone, you're willing to sacrifice for them.
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself.
That's the demonstration. Again, we think of the example that Jesus gave for us of what he did because of his love. So when we think about loving God, we sacrifice for him.
And he says, surrender yourself.
Mm-hmm. And the more we give to him, the closer that relationship grows, and he blesses that. Now here's another one. This is almost like sin, obedience. Isn't that what you send your dog to? Obedience training? Anybody done that? Did it work? Maybe. But obedience. That's not something that we talk about a lot, maybe.
Especially in our culture.
In our culture. We're not big on obedience, In our culture, it's all about.
You say you're your own person.
That's right. This is America, man. You're your own individual and liberty and all of that. And obedience. No. Now, do we want other people to obey the law? I sure hope so. We recognize that there are places in life where you need to, we don't call it obedience, but what might we call it?
Training.
Okay, we might call it training. We might say, if it's obedience, then I'm conforming, or we might find another way to describe that.
Cooperate.
Yeah, cooperate. I think that's a really good word. We're cooperating, which means we're obeying, but it doesn't sound like we're, if you say obedience is like I'm submitting to somebody, and I don't like that idea. But but it's still something that we need. So if we're talking to people about some of these words that we're finding here in 1 John, and we're talking about a relationship with God, then how, if we're talking to people with whom we work and that we meet day to day, how do we sort of translate these ideas of obedience and love and sin and all these sorts of things in a way that they might understand?
If you love someone, you have their best interest in mind. Whether it's a coworker or not.
So if you have somebody's best interest in mind, does that mean that we might need to sacrifice something for that other person? Yeah, so can you think of examples of maybe that you've seen of someone who because they sacrificed something or they gave up something, that really made a strong impression on another person, maybe who wasn't a believer? I think those kinds of things can happen, because if we respond to people as would be normal, if people are unkind, if people say things or they do things that are hurtful or unfair, then the way we respond to those people may give them some indication of what we're saying about God.
Lee, isn't that a lot of what Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, about the second mile, going the second mile, turning the other cheek, loving those who hate you, and those kinds of things? Isn't that essentially what we're talking about?
Because those are, all the time, loving enemies, turning the other cheek, all those sorts of things. Those aren't the things that people do. That's not normal. So Jesus is talking about things that aren't normal, right? Exactly. When people see that, they want to know why. What's the difference in this person's life? Why?
Being willing to suffer against yourself without retaliation.
Yeah. And that can be really hard, even for us as Christians, as believers. When you get hurt by someone, it's natural to retaliate. That's your human side. That's your flesh. But if you can find a way to return good for evil, sometimes we think of it in terms of things you don't do, but sometimes it can be, doing the opposite thing. Just as Steve reminded us in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about going the second mile, doing more. Living in such a way that people want to know about the difference that God can make in a person's life. And especially, if they know that, we're just real people. We don't have wings and we don't, keep the halo in the car when we walk into the office. We're just real people. But we're allowing, because we know God and because we want to know Him more and because we love Him. It says, wasn't this in the first chapter? It said, if we say we love God, but hate our brother.
Coming up, yeah, that's coming up.
That's coming up. Then if the way we treat other people, if we treat them poorly, that doesn't say much for how much we love God. It's called an Indian proverb that comes from India that says that, when you're carrying your jug of water, when you're bumped, whatever is inside the jug is going to spill out. So when life bumps us, when people bump us, that which spills out, and it may take effort, for us to make sure it's not something that we would regret. But if we can think about that in the way we treat people, then that can have a huge impact, because we're demonstrating not that we're necessarily different, but the difference is God, the difference that he makes in our life.
You know, when we think about Jesus as our advocate, it wasn't that just here's what Jesus is against. It's also what he was for. You know, he's for us. And that's essentially what being an advocate is. It's being for us. And when we talk about being countercultural, it's not just, well, we're against these things that are out there in culture, but we're for these things. And I think that's how love is demonstrated. Perfectly so in Jesus.
And if there was ever a time in our country where we needed to demonstrate the love of Christ, this is the time. I mean, we need to be more, and we need to do more through God's help, because our country's in desperate straits. And it's going to come at a cost. It's going to require us to sacrifice. And, you know, maybe in ways that we can't imagine. But if we'll do it on a daily basis to demonstrate our love for God and our love for other people, that, you know, God can work through us to really help our nation at a really crucial time.
Recently, I gave a gentleman something to eat. He was in me. And he cried and said, people are not like me.
Yeah. Any little thing we can do, like Jesus said, you know, even if you give a cup of cold water in my name, there's a reward that's attached to that. So, Steve, I think we're at the end of our time. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. It's great to see you again face to face, and we'll continue the study next week.